They made me kneel in the dirt so everyone could see what I was worth, and I let them, because for 20 years I had believed every word they said. I was my mother's shame, my father's ruin, the cursed girl born between two disasters, fit only to scrub floors and disappear. I had no name worth keeping, I had no blood worth honoring. So I knelt, I bowed my head, I waited for it to be over. I did not know that he was watching. I did not know that the story they were so certain they were ending had, in fact, not yet begun. They did not even let me speak. That is the part I still return to, even now. Not the verdict itself. I had known, somewhere in the cold place beneath my ribs, how it would end the moment the guards reached me in that corridor. No. What I return to is the speed of it. The council convened before the ash had finished settling. By morning, 12 men who had never once looked at my face sat in a torch-lit chamber and decided what I was. By afternoon, it was done. Unanimous, sealed, delivered to the head elder's desk with the casual efficiency of men completing routine business. No investigation, no inquiry, no witness called on my behalf. Because what would have been the point? I was Margaret of the lower halls, daughter of a drunkard, daughter of a harlot, the cursed girl who had always been exactly one disaster away from becoming someone's explanation. The pack had rehearsed this ending my entire life. The fire simply gave them an occasion to perform it. The council did not fail that night. That is the part that hollows me when I think about it too long. They functioned exactly as they were designed to function, and I was exactly the kind of person such a design requires. I was held overnight in the servants' quarters. The other girls kept their eyes on the floor when the guards brought me back. I did not blame them. I understood the arithmetic of survival better than anyone in that room. To speak for me was to stand beside me. To stand beside me was to be seen standing beside me. None of them could afford that. I had never been able to afford it either. I lay on the narrow cot and I did not sleep. I let 20 years of the pack's voice fill the silence instead. My mother's name spoken in corners, my father's end recounted like a cautionary tale at dinner tables I was never invited to sit at. The specific way people stepped around me in corridors as though proximity itself carried risk. By the time dawn came, I was not afraid. I was empty, hollowed clean by everything I had already accepted. And in that hollow, a thought surfaced that I did not ask for and could not quite push down. Someone started that fire. Someone walked away. And I am here because that person understood without hesitation that this is exactly where I would end up. I thought about what that required. Not malice. Malice takes effort. What it required was something simpler and harder to fight. The complete and comfortable certainty that I did not matter enough to think twice about. That using me as a shield cost nothing, because I was worth nothing, and everyone, including me, already knew it. I turned it over in the dark until the guards came. I could do nothing with it yet, but I did not let it go. No one told me about the parade until it started.
They dressed it in the language of procedure, formal rank removal, conducted in accordance with pack law. But the moment the courtyard gates opened and I saw the assembled crowd, I understood exactly what it was. A performance. Designed not to punish me, but to be witnessed. A public ceremony of certainty, arranged so that everyone who attended could leave with the same agreed-upon story. This is what happens to girls like her. I walked the full length of it, every stone beneath my feet, every pair of eyes tracking my progress with the particular attention of people who have been given official permission to look. I felt the cold air hit my neck when the elder tore my collar at the seam, not quickly, not carelessly, but with the slow deliberateness of someone who understood that the ceremony was in the detail. I heard the formal charge read in that voice, that enormous, practiced, carrying voice that turned my name into an accusation with every syllable. Destruction of sacred property, betrayal of the crown's trust, conduct unbecoming of service to the throne. The Voland relic. I had heard its name spoken in reverence my entire time in the palace, a sacred object that predated the treaty itself, that the pack believed anchored the moon goddess's blessing over the borderlands. Without it, I had heard the servants whisper, the eastern borders were spiritually exposed, undefended. The pack would feel it in their bones. They would feel the absence of divine favor like a wound that didn't bleed. I had destroyed it, they said. I, who had never once been permitted close enough to touch it. I knelt when I was told to kneel. I pressed my knees into the courtyard stones, and I fixed my gaze on the ground, and I did what I had always done. I made myself as small as the world had decided I was. The crowd pressed in around the edges of the ceremony, and I could feel their collective weight, the heat of their certainty, the specific satisfaction of people watching a story conclude the way they always knew it would. And then I heard her, Lady Seraphine's voice, somewhere to my left, pitched at precisely the volume of someone who wants to be overheard without appearing to speak publicly. Such a tragedy, she said to whoever stood beside her. The relic has been in my family's trust for generations. I can barely look at it. I kept my eyes on the ground. She could not look at what she had destroyed. I understood that. I simply understood it differently than she intended. I waited for the ceremony to end. And then the air in the courtyard changed. Not the way things stop when they are finished, the way things stop when something interrupts them. A silence moved through the crowd, not the planned silence of a ceremony reaching its conclusion, but the startled, uncertain silence of people suddenly unsure what they are witnessing. I heard the head elder's voice catch in the middle of a sentence. I heard the shift in the crowd's breathing, hundreds of people turning in the same direction at the same moment, like a tide reversing. I did not look up. I didn't dare. But I heard the footsteps, measured, unhurried, descending from somewhere above, from the colonnade that overlooked the courtyard, where no one had been standing when the ceremony began. Someone was coming down. And the head elder, that enormous, authoritative 30-year voice, had gone completely, utterly silent. Who conducted the inquiry? 3 words, quiet enough that the crowd had to stop breathing to hear them. The head elder answered. I could hear the effort it cost him to sound composed. The voice let the answer settle, How many witnesses were called? Another answer, shorter, less certain. And who spoke for her? The silence that followed that question was the most devastating thing I had ever heard produced by the absence of sound. It lasted 4 full seconds. I counted them against the stone beneath my knees. When the head elder finally responded, something procedural, something about the weight of evidence, the clarity of circumstances, the unanimity of the council, the voice did not argue. It did not press. It simply moved on. Which was worse, because it meant the question had already done everything it needed to do. The footsteps turned and stopped, directly in front of me. Margaret. My full name, not girl, not servant, not the charge being read from the elder's document. My name, spoken by a voice that carried it like it was simply a fact that had always existed and merely needed saying aloud. I looked up for the first time. He was taller than I had understood from a distance. Dark coat, no ornamentation, nothing arranged around him to signal what he was, and yet the entire courtyard had reorganized itself in relation to his presence the moment he entered it. Pale eyes that were not cold so much as precise. The eyes of a man who looked at things until he understood them completely and had learned that most things did not require long. He was looking at me now, not at my torn collar, not at the mark the ceremony had left, at me, with the specific level attention of someone taking an accurate account. "The matter is under royal review," he said. "To the courtyard, to the elders, to all of it. The verdict is suspended." The sound that moved through the crowd was not protest and not shock. It was something between the two, the particular noise a room makes when it has been asked to recalibrate and does not yet know in which direction. He extended his hand. I stared at it for a moment that felt much longer than it was. A king's open hand in front of a girl who had spent 3 years perfecting the art of not being noticed. Every instinct I possessed told me this was a mechanism, another tool in a world that had always found inventive ways to remind me what I was. A hand extended could become a hand withdrawn. I knew that. I had learned it early, and I had never had cause to unlearn it. But his eyes had not moved. He was still looking at me, not with impatience, not with performance, but with the particular stillness of a man who has made a decision and is simply allowing it time to become real. I took his hand. The physical act of rising, I was not prepared for it. Not the steadiness of the grip or the help of it, but what it felt like to stand after kneeling on those stones. My legs carried me upright, and the courtyard opened around me, and I was suddenly visible in a way that kneeling had never made me. Kneeling renders you small enough to look past. Standing makes you something a crowd must look at directly. I do not know what my face did. I hope it held. From somewhere to my left, I heard Lady Seraphine's intake of breath, sharp, involuntary, the sound of someone watching a script depart from the version they memorized. I did not look at her. Not yet. By midday, the council was in emergency session. By mid-afternoon, the word I heard most often from the guard outside my new door, a door in a wing I had never been permitted to enter as anything other than a mop and a lowered head, was unprecedented, spoken with the tight-clipped energy of men who found the word both accurate and deeply inconvenient. There was a window in my new chamber, a fire already burning, a bed with more than one blanket, and I stood in the center of the room for a long time, simply unable to sit on it, because sitting on it would require me to accept that I was allowed to be here, and I had not yet built the internal architecture to support that. By evening, the wing had gone quiet in the specific way of a place bracing. I sat on the edge of the bed. I turned his voice over in my mind. Margaret. Searching for the mechanism in it, the catch, the place where it curdled. There had to be one. There was always one. A sound at the floor. Paper sliding beneath the door. Heavy stalk. Dark wax seal. I crossed the room. The candle guttered as I reached for it, a violent warning flutter, and then held, throwing just enough light to illuminate the High Elder's mark, and beneath it, in a hand too controlled to be anything but furious, my name. I read it. 4 sentences. I folded it carefully with hands steadier than I had any right to expect, and I sat with what it meant until the fire burned low. The High Elder was coming, personally, and he was not coming to negotiate. He arrived the following morning, and I felt it before I saw it. The palace changed when he entered, a drop in ambient sound, a sudden purposefulness in feet that had been carefully casual, the particular alertness of a household adjusting itself around someone it both needed and feared. I heard his name spoken in the corridor outside my door in a tone that told me everything. This was not a visit. This was an arrival. The kind that rearranged things. He was escorted to the council chamber. Whatever occurred inside those doors lasted 2 hours. When it ended, the energy in the palace had shifted in a way I felt in my chest before I could name it. My guard reported it in the quiet, even tone he had developed over the last day. The voice of a man who had made some private decision about which side of history he intended to stand on. The council had formalized their opposition to the royal review, a petition, every elder, addressed to the king, framed as concern for the kingdom. And the High Elder? I asked. My guard looked at the middle distance, requesting a formal meeting with the king, tonight. A pause, and he's brought his daughter with him. I went very still. Lady Seraphine was here, in this palace, walking its corridors, and she knew, she had to know, that the machinery she had trusted was stuttering, that the ending she had walked away from was no longer as settled as she had left it. I wondered how long it would take before she decided to deal with me herself. I did not have to wonder long. She came that evening, just after the guard changed shifts. I heard the knock and expected my meal tray. Instead, Lady Seraphine stood in the doorway, in a gown the color of winter frost, composed and unhurried, and utterly, precisely beautiful in the way of someone who has always understood beauty as a form of armor. She looked at my chamber with an expression of polite, minimal surprise, the kind deployed by people who have trained themselves to register nothing they haven't already anticipated. "You've been made comfortable," she said, not a question. I did not invite her in. She entered anyway. "I'll be brief. She moved to the center of the room, my center, and stopped there as though she had always intended to occupy it. Whatever you believe you saw that night, whatever story you've constructed, I would encourage you to consider the wisdom of letting it go. Her voice was kind. That was the most dangerous thing about it. You've been offered an opportunity that no one in your position has ever received. The king is attentive to injustice. It's admirable. But attentions shift. Treaties, however, last. She tilted her head. Leave quietly, and I will ensure you're placed somewhere better than the lower halls. You have my word. I looked at her for a long moment. Your word, I said. Something moved behind her eyes, just briefly. The relic, I said, was in the East Wing display case, the case that sits 12 feet from the writing desk in your private suite. I kept my voice exactly as level as hers. I've scrubbed that floor. I know exactly how far 12 feet is. I held her gaze. You should leave. She left, but the coldness she carried into the room did not leave with her, and I understood with the specific clarity of someone who has survived 20 years by reading the unspoken, that I had just become a problem she intended to solve before dawn. He came himself that same night. No courtiers, no announcement, 2 measured knocks, and then Valentine was in the doorway without the architecture of his office around him, looking like a man who had not slept and did not particularly care who noticed. He sat in the chair across from the small table. I sat across from him. The fire was low. Neither of us moved to rebuild it. What did you see that night? He said. No preamble, no courtesy passage to get us there. I told him everything. The late hour, the corridor, the smell of smoke arriving before any alarm, the emptiness of the East Wing, the silence before the guards came. I told him in the same flat voice I used for household accounts, because ornamentation would only obscure what he was actually listening for, and something in the quality of his attention told me he was listening for something specific. When I finished, the fire settled. Somewhere in the palace, a door opened and closed. Then he said, "I believe you." 3 words. No performance, no crowd, just a quiet room and his eyes, steady and direct, and the complete absence of any reason to say it except that he meant it. I had not been believed in 20 years. I did not know what to do with that. I held his gaze, and I nodded, and I did not let my face do anything that would cost me later. He did not leave immediately. That surprised me. He sat for a moment longer in the low firelight, as though the chair had earned a slightly longer occupation, and in that unhurried pause I noticed something I had not expected to see in a king, the particular quality of stillness that belongs not to power, but to someone simply choosing, for a moment, not to be anywhere else. He looked at the fire. I looked at the fire. Neither of us spoke. It lasted perhaps 30 seconds. It felt like something being established. Then he rose, quietly, and left, and I sat in the silence he had occupied, and felt, beneath all the fear and uncertainty and the 12 feet of floor I had memorized on my hands and knees, the first faint, dangerous warmth of not being alone in this. After a while, my God knocked, once, the sound of news no one wanted to carry. 2 council members, the East Corridor, the High Elder's envoy's private rooms. An hour ago, unannounced. Whatever was being built, it had moved past a petition, and I was running out of time to simply wait for it.
The truth did not announce itself. It accumulated, piece by careful piece, through the people the council had never thought to manage because such people had never mattered enough to silence. The steward first. 40 years in palace service, the kind of man who recorded everything not because he was instructed to, but because he understood, in the bone-deep way of someone who has survived multiple administrations, that written records are the only currency that outlasts power. His log for the night of the fire noted, in his cramped, habitual hand, that Lady Seraphine had departed the East Wing 14 minutes before the alarm sounded. The alarm sounded at the hour exactly. 14 minutes. The kitchen girl's second, 14 years old, with no political allegiance and no understanding of why what she had seen mattered. She had noticed Lady Seraphine in the service corridor because nobility there was unusual enough to register. Lady Seraphine had been carrying a folded letter. No lamp, no relic, nothing that produced an innocent explanation for her presence in that part of the palace at that hour. The floor, last. The scorch pattern did not originate at the display case. It originated at the writing desk, the one accessible only through Lady Seraphine's private suite, and moved outward from there, reaching the relic only as a consequence, an afterthought. Fire, it turns out, remembers exactly where it begins, even when the person who lit it has long since composed herself and returned to perform grief at the appropriate volume. When the full shape of it assembled, the timestamp, the letter, the desk, the 14 minutes, the rival faction her father would have called treasonous, it told a story so simple and so complete that the only remarkable thing about it was how little concealment had been attempted. Because why would she bother? Why would Lady Seraphine trouble herself to hide what she had done, when the palace would do it for her? When there was a girl in the corridor with cursed blood and no allies, and a name the council had been looking for an excuse to use for years. She had not planned it. That was almost the worst part. She had not schemed or calculated. She had simply panicked and fled, and allowed the machinery that had always existed to run exactly as designed. And it had, perfectly, immediately, without hesitation. When Valentine received the assembled evidence, I was told he sat with it for an entire night without summoning anyone, just the truth and what it meant and what it was going to cost to act on it. By morning, the High Elder's final message arrived. My guard read me the terms quietly, with his eyes on the wall above my head. My removal from royal protection, reinstatement of the council's verdict, formal public punishment before the next moon. In exchange, the continuation of the 30-year treaty, the border agreements, the tariff protections, the trade routes that 3 provinces depended on for primary income, the peace that tens of thousands of ordinary people had built their lives around. All of it measured against me. And then he told me the part that made the room tilt on its axis. The High Elder had known, not suspected, known. His people had conducted their own accounting in the first hours after the fire. He had seen the same timestamps, traced the same path, reached the same simple, irrefutable conclusion. He had looked at the full truth of what his daughter had done, and he had written the ultimatum anyway. He had chosen her over the truth, over me, because she was his, and I was nothing,
and in his world, that calculation did not constitute a difficult choice. I sat with that for a long time after my guard left. Not the political weight of it. I had been carrying that for days. The personal weight. The specific, quiet cruelty of being looked at by someone who knew the truth and chose the lie anyway, because the lie was cheaper than I was, because I was the kind of person whose innocence, once confirmed, still did not cost enough to protect. I had known this about the world since I was old enough to understand my mother's name. I had built my entire survival around it. Knowing it and sitting with the fresh proof of it were two different things. Valentine read the ultimatum. My guard was outside the study when it happened. He set it down carefully, too carefully, and then went completely still, jaw set, eyes forward, the specific stillness of a man who has already made his decision and is waiting for the moment to enact it. By midnight, he knocked on my door. He sat across from me in the dying firelight, and he did not soften any of it. 3 provinces, primary income, real people. His oldest advisor's counsel that no servant, however wrongly used, had ever been worth a kingdom's peace. His general's maps, his closest ally's suggestion that Margaret herself would probably say let her go if he asked. "I'm not going to ask you that," he said. "Because you've already decided," I said. "Because the answer shouldn't have to come from you." He held my gaze without management or arrangement. "I came to tell you what I intend to do. Refuse the ultimatum, take the consequences. I am not asking your permission. I am giving you the truth because you have been kept from it by everyone in this building long enough." The room was very quiet, and I sat with it, the full weight of what he was offering to sacrifice, and I felt something move in my chest that I had not expected. Not gratitude, not relief, something that cracked at the edges, just slightly, in the place I had kept sealed for 20 years. The place that had stopped expecting anyone to consider my worth before spending it. My throat tightened once. I let it. Just once, in the privacy of that low burning room, I let it. Then I breathed, and I spoke. "No," I said. He went still. "I will not let you burn your kingdom for me." The words came out leveler than what was happening inside me, which was the most precise description of my entire life I could have offered. I will speak for myself. I will take the evidence into that chamber, and I will present it in front of the council, in front of the High Elder, in front of every face that watched the parade. I held his gaze. "You don't have to burn anything. The truth will do it." The silence lasted long enough that I began to inventory my miscalculations. Then he smiled. Small, slow, arriving like something that had traveled a considerable distance. Not the smile of a man who had been agreed with, or relieved, or handed a convenient exit. Something quieter than any of those. The expression of someone encountering a face they did not know they had been looking for. "I won't stand down." He sat across from me in the dying firelight, and he did not soften any of it. 3 provinces, primary income, real people. His oldest advisor's counsel that no servant, however wrongly used, had ever been worth a kingdom's peace. his general's maps, his closest ally's suggestion that Margaret herself would probably say let her go if he asked. "I'm not going to ask you that," he said. "Because you've already decided," I said. "Because the answer shouldn't have to come from you." He held my gaze without management or arrangement. "I came to tell you what I intend to do. Refuse the ultimatum, take the consequences. I am not asking your permission. I am giving you the truth because you have been kept from it by everyone in this building long enough." The room was very quiet, and I sat with it, the full weight of what he was offering to sacrifice, and I felt something move in my chest that I had not expected. Not gratitude, not relief, something that cracked at the edges, just slightly, in the place I had kept sealed for 20 years. The place that had stopped expecting anyone to consider my worth before spending it. My throat tightened once. I let it. Just once, in the privacy of that low burning room, I let it. Then I breathed, and I spoke. "No," I said. He went still. "I will not let you burn your kingdom for me." The words came out leveler than what was happening inside me, which was the most precise description of my entire life I could have offered. "I will speak for myself. I will take the evidence into that chamber, and I will present it in front of the council, in front of the High Elder, in front of every face that watched the parade." I held his gaze. "You don't have to burn anything. The truth will do it." The silence lasted long enough that I began to inventory my miscalculations. Then he smiled. Small, slow, arriving like something that had traveled a considerable distance. Not the smile of a man who had been agreed with, or relieved, or handed a convenient exit. Something quieter than any of those. The expression of someone encountering a face they did not know they had been looking for. "I won't stand down," he said, "but I'll let you lead." He left me with the evidence. He left me with 2 hours until dawn, a fire burned to nothing, and the specific vertiginous weight of a choice I had made with everything I had before I fully understood its cost. I sat on the edge of the bed. I held the papers in both hands. 20 years of being used as other people's solutions. In 2 hours, I would use myself as my own. The candle burned to its last half-inch. Dawn was coming, whether I was ready or not. I did not knock. The council chamber doors were heavy oak, banded in iron, designed to communicate permanence and exclusion in equal measure. I had scrubbed the corridor floor outside them 47 times in 3 years. I had never once been on the other side. I put both hands flat against the wood, and I pushed. The room was full. Every elder at the long table, the High Elder himself at the far end, bearing the absolute composure of a man who has decided the outcome in advance. Lady Seraphine stood to his right, perfectly placed, perfectly arranged, watching me enter with the expression of someone watching a problem they thought they had solved get back up. 2 senior advisors, the record keeper in the corner whose quill stopped moving the instant I cleared the threshold, and Valentine, standing left of the head table, slightly apart from all of it, watching me with an expression I did not stop to read. No one moved to stop me. I had counted on the half-second of surprise, and I had counted correctly. By the time the room understood what it was seeing, I had already reached the center and begun. The steward's log places Lady Seraphine in the east wing at 14 minutes before the alarm. I set the document on the table, open, original, his hand, his date, his timestamp. This is not my document. I did not write it. I could not have written it. I was in this courtyard kneeling on stone when it was last reviewed. Silence. I did not fill it. I let it work. A kitchen girl, 14 years old, with no allegiance to anyone in this room, observed Lady Seraphine leaving the service corridor that evening, carrying a folded letter. No lamp, no relic, no explanation for her presence in that wing at that hour. I placed the written account beside the log. She gave this statement because she was asked. She only knows what she saw. The head elder opened his mouth. I continued. The scorch pattern on the east wing floor originates at the private writing desk in Lady Seraphine's suite. I unfolded the diagram, Valentine's precise, unambiguous hand, not at the display case, not at the door where I was found, at the desk. The burn travels outward from there, reaching the Voland relic as a consequence, not a cause. I looked up. I met the room. All of it. One breath. Fire does not lie where it starts. The silence that settled after that sentence was categorically different from the silence before it. The first had been stunned. This one was the sound of a room that had run completely out of road. I turned to the High Elder. He was already watching me, with the fixed, unblinking attention of a man watching something he cannot afford to misread. His composure was intact, precisely intact, the way a structure is intact in the seconds before it registers that its foundation has been removed. Lady Seraphine stood perfectly still beside him. Her face had not changed. It would not change, not here, not publicly, not in front of witnesses. But her hands, I noticed, had found each other at her waist, laced together, pressing. And her eyes, just for a moment, just for the half-second before she recovered, found mine. It was not an apology. I want to be honest about that. There was no remorse in it, no contrition, no acknowledgement of what she had let happen to me in that courtyard. What I saw was something colder and more honest than any of those things. The specific recognition of a woman who understood that the calculation she had made, that I was the kind of person who could be used without consequence, had just been proven catastrophically wrong. In public, in front of witnesses, in front of the father who had built his dynasty on the certainty that bloodlines like hers were worth protecting and bloodlines like mine were worth spending. She looked away first. I turned back to the High Elder. "You knew," I said. Not an accusation, a statement, delivered at the volume of the room. Your own people conducted their accounting in the hours after the fire. You had access to the same records. You traced the same path I am showing this council right now. I did not look away from him. You looked at the full and complete truth of what happened in that wing, and then you wrote an ultimatum demanding my punishment anyway. A sound moved through the room. Not a word, not a protest, but the collective exhale of people rapidly doing arithmetic and arriving at the same uncomfortable answer. I am not asking you to confirm it, I said. Everyone at this table is already confirming it themselves. I watched the heads turn, slowly, toward the High Elder, the specific recalibration of a room that has been presented with an interpretation and cannot locate the flaw in it. And then, the High Elder did something I had not anticipated. He tried to speak. He drew breath, the full, deliberate breath of a man who has commanded rooms for 30 years, and opened his mouth. And nothing came. Not silence chosen strategically, not the controlled quiet of a man declining to dignify a challenge. Nothing. The words he had spent a lifetime wielding simply did not arrive. His jaw tightened, his hand on the table pressed flat against the wood, the knuckles going pale with the pressure of it, and for one exposed, unguarded second, the most powerful man in that room looked like exactly what he was, a father who had made a catastrophic choice and was standing in the wreckage of it in public, with nowhere left to go. He looked away first. 30 years of leverage, 3 decades of sacred honor and diplomatic immunity, and the unassailable authority of bloodline and relic and treaty. It dissolved in that single averted gaze, not loudly, not with ceremony, but with the quiet, irrefutable finality of a thing that has simply run out of ground to stand on.
Into that silence, Valentine stepped forward. He did not look at the council. He did not look at the High Elder, or at Lady Seraphine, or at any of the faces that had built and sustained the machinery this morning had just dismantled. He looked at me. "This is Margaret." His voice carried the full length of the chamber without effort, the same voice that had stopped a courtyard with 3 questions. She entered this kingdom as its lowest servant. She was falsely accused by this council, publicly degraded before this pack, and delivered to a political machine as its most convenient answer to an inconvenient problem. He did not pause. He did not give the room space to interrupt. This morning, she walked into this chamber uninvited, unannounced, and undefended, and she dismantled that machine with the truth, in front of the people who built it, using the knowledge she gathered while they were too busy dismissing her to notice she was learning. A breath. I will not insult her by calling it remarkable. It is simply what she is, and it is past time this room recognized it. He turned to the full assembled council, the High Elder, the room entire. "Margaret of Valdenmoor, Queen of Valdenmoor by royal decree, by her own courage and by the truth she carried into this chamber when no one else would." The words landed in the room like something that had been waiting a long time to be said. No one argued. There was nothing left to argue with. The pack did not transform overnight. I want to be truthful about that, because easy resolutions would dishonor what it actually cost. There were council members who would never fully reconcile themselves to what happened in that chamber. There were corridors that stayed cold for years, noble families who found quieter and more sophisticated means of communicating their position. The world that had assigned my worth before I was born did not simply revise its judgment because it had been publicly wrong. It is not built to do that. But something load-bearing cracked that morning, something seamless and self-assured and centuries old. And once a thing of that kind cracks, not at the surface but at the foundation, it cannot be restored through insistence. It can only be built into something different.
That would take time. It would take years. A beginning was enough. 6 months later, I stood beside Valentine at the formal accord ceremony in the great hall of Valdenmoor. Not behind him, beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of him in the cold formal air, close enough that when the assembled pack bowed, they bowed to the space we occupied together. The new treaty, renegotiated without the High Elders faction, with nations that did not require the sacrifice of innocent people as proof of good faith, had been signed 3 weeks prior. The border provinces had stabilized. The moon goddess's blessing, the palace priests declared with considerable creativity, rested now on truth rather than blood. The hall was full. Every face that had watched the parade, every face that had looked through me in corridors for 3 years, every face that had made its arithmetic and found me insufficient. They bowed. Valentine turned to look at me. He had learned in the months between that dawn and this one that I did not always need him to speak, that sometimes what I needed most was simply to be looked at directly by someone who saw what was actually there. Then, in front of the full assembled hall, in front of every face that had ever decided what I was worth, he turned to the room. "Margaret of Valdenmoor." His voice filled the hall the way it always filled whatever room it entered, without effort, without performance. Queen of Valdenmoor by royal decree, by her own courage, by the truth she carried into a room full of people who had agreed to deny it and refused to put it down. The hall was very still. "She did not become a queen because I named her one," he said. "She became a queen in a council chamber at dawn when she walked in alone and chose not to kneel." The silence held for one long breath. Then the hall bowed, all of it, together. And I stood and received it, not with the stunned passivity of someone surprised to be standing, but with the particular steadiness of a woman who has decided once and completely to stop being surprised by the space she occupies. Valentine reached down and took my hand, not to steady me, not to lead me forward or announce me to the room, simply because it was where his hand belonged. I held it. I looked out at the hall, at the bowed heads, at the formal and witnessed conclusion of a story that had begun with me on my knees, believing every word they said about me. I thought about the girl who had walked the length of that courtyard with her collar torn and her name turned into an accusation, who had pressed her knees into cold stone and made herself as small as the world had decided she was. I thought about what it had felt like to take his hand, to stand. She did not disappear. She was just waiting for the moment I stopped agreeing with them. There is one more thing I have not said. The night before the ceremony, Valentine and I walked the East Colonnade, the one that overlooks the courtyard where it began. Below us, the stones were empty and cold and entirely ordinary, the way places become once the extraordinary thing that happened in them has passed into something else. I looked at the place where I had knelt. After a long quiet, he said, "I almost didn't come down." I turned to look at him. I stood up here for 4 minutes telling myself it wasn't my business, that inserting myself would complicate the political situation more than it would resolve. He paused. I almost convinced myself. "What changed?" I asked. "You didn't cry," he said. Everyone in that courtyard expected you to. I could see them waiting, and you just didn't. You kept your eyes down, and you made yourself small, and you waited. And something about that was the most precise description of 20 years I have ever witnessed without being told a single fact about them. I looked at the courtyard below. I almost didn't take your hand either, I said. I know, he said. I saw you decide. We stood in the ordinary dark above the courtyard that had been the beginning of everything, and I thought about all the almost didn'ts that had brought us here. Almost, and then.
There is nothing left to say, except this. I am Margaret of Valdenmoor. I was my mother's shame and my father's ruin, and the cursed girl born between two disasters. I scrubbed floors in a palace that did not know my name. I was accused, convicted without a witness, and paraded before a pack that had decided my ending long before I had lived enough to object. I knelt. I waited. And then a king descended a flight of stairs because something did not add up, and he extended his hand, and I made the most consequential decision of my life in the half-second before instinct could talk me out of it. I took it. Everything that followed was simply the consequence of that, of choosing, when the hand was offered, to stand. I am not the story they told about my mother. I am not the silence around my father's name. I am not the cursed girl they made me in the years between. I am the woman who walked into a room at dawn and refused to kneel. Valentine holds my hand now, not because I need steadying, simply because it is where his hand belongs, beside mine, as an equal, in the palace that is now as much mine as it was ever anyone's. I was done looking down a long time ago, and I have never once looked back.